Hey y'all, I'm Lauren and welcome to Cantina Cast. Today I am talking about Eye of Darkness by George Mann. This novel comes out on November 14th, and today I'm giving my full thoughts on the novel, spoilers, full plot summary, all of that. If you haven't read it yet, I recommend checking out my sneak peek video that I recently did. That's a non-spoiler kind of what to expect and what to read first before reading this one. So if you don't want spoilers, watch that video where I just keep it very general. Also, in addition to that, I recently was on the Cantina Cast live stream with Albert where we talked about The Blade, which was the Charles Soule comic from Phase 2 that covers Porter Engle. If you haven't read this comic yet, I recommend it before reading Eye of Darkness because if you're into the character of Porter Engle at all, we do see him in Eye of Darkness, and The Blade gives some really good backstory for that character. And also, that was just a really great read. I just enjoyed that comic, even as like a standalone story. So I recommend reading it regardless. And if you want to hear me and Albert talk about that comic in more detail, definitely check out that live stream. We cover it in a lot of detail on that one. And honestly, when it comes to what you should read before you read Eye of Darkness, I've previously talked about how I definitely recommend reading All Jedi Walk Their Own Path, which is the Charles Soule short story from Tales of Light and Life, the short story collection. I also recommend getting caught up on the High Republic Phase 3 comics before reading this novel because the comics do answer a lot of questions. And even outside of that, I recommend not skipping Phase 2. That's a question that I've seen people asking is it okay to just go straight from Phase 1 to Phase 3? Which I understand why that's tempting because the characters from Phase 1 are just so lovable. It's like I really didn't want to take a break from those characters either. But I do feel like after reading Eye of Darkness, I feel like there is a lot of context in Phase 2 that was helpful for me to have. And it kind of made some parts of Eye of Darkness more impactful because I knew that backstory. So if you don't know that backstory from Phase 2, you're not going to be totally lost. It's not like you're not going to be able to read it, but I just feel like it really adds a lot to the story that if you're interested in High Republic, I think it's worth it to have that context. So now I'm going to give my general thoughts about Eye of Darkness. I'm just going to keep it general for the first part of this video, and then I'll let you know before I start talking spoilers. So if you haven't read this yet, you don't get anything spoiled if you don't want to. So I really, really loved this novel. It got me excited about the High Republic all over again. We got to check back in with a lot of my favorite characters from Phase 1, characters that I had been missing over the past few months during Phase 2. And I just really feel like if you enjoyed Phase 1, if you liked the tone of Phase 1, some of the themes of Phase 1, and just kind of like the type of story that was being told, I feel like you're really going to like this novel. I don't think you're going to be disappointed. This novel also did a really good job of tying together Phase 1 and Phase 2, and I'm excited to see in what other ways Phase 3 is going to do that. Because, of course, we had those characters that we love so much from Phase 1, but we did have some of the context from Phase 2, sort of why people are the way they are. You might know who I'm referring to, sort of just like why the situation is what it's gotten to, just some background story that I feel like is just good to have. And there were some references made throughout this novel about things that happened during Phase 2, so it was good to be able to catch those moments, and just kind of know a little bit about how it ties together. There is still a lot that has not yet been revealed. This is only the first novel of Phase 3, so I think it still remains to be seen exactly how they're going to tie together. There are still some lingering questions, but we are starting to see how it fits together. So, long story short, I loved it. You have to read it if you're reading High Republic, and I think you're going to really enjoy it. It got me excited about High Republic all over again, as I've said many times before. So now I am going to start talking spoilers. So if you haven't read this one yet, if you don't want spoilers, now is your time to turn back. So this novel opens 1 year after the fall of Starlight Beacon. Our Phase 1 characters Most notably, the ones that we see the most of in this book, Belzetifar, Elzar Mann, Lena So, and also the rest of the Jedi, they are desperately trying to figure out what to do after the fall of Starlight Beacon, and because of the fact that the Jedi have really not made a lot of progress since then. The Nihil have set up the Storm Wall, which what that is it is a barrier in between planets that they have conquered in the Outer Rim and Republic planets. And the planets that the Nihil have conquered in this year, they, of course, as you can imagine, are having an awful time. The Nihil have conquered them forcibly. They are raiding these planets. The people are starving. The Nihil don't care. Like, I mean, they're the Nihil. I mean, how do you think they would govern? It's pretty awful for these people. Everything behind the barrier is called the occlusion zone. And some of our favorite characters from phase one are also trapped behind this occlusion zone too. Most notably, Avar Chris and Porter Ingle. Also behind the occlusion zone is Real Dario. You might remember her as the Republic reporter that we see at certain points in phase one. And then also Grandmaster Pratri Veter is also behind the storm wall in the occlusion zone. And Rill and Grandmaster Veter, they both are being held captive by the Nihil. So that's kind of where we're at when we're starting off. And this book, it does jump around between the different points of view of these characters a lot. Like pretty much each chapter, you're switching POV characters. So, because of that, I'm going to give my summary in chunks based on character. So, everything that I'm saying, just kind of take it with knowing that as you're reading this, you're actually going back and forth between each character. So, starting off with Elzar Mann, when we pick up with Elzar Mann, he is a shell of himself. He has been forever changed by the fall of Starlight Beacon, not only because he lost Stellan, his best friend, and Orla, his mentor, who really helped him through a very difficult time in his life. Not only because he lost them, but because he also still partially blames himself for what happened on Starlight. If you remember at the end of phase one, when Starlight was in the process of being taken over by the Nihil, there was one character, Chansey Yarrow, who had the capability of being able to put a stop to the systems that the Nihil, pretty much the domino effect that the Nihil had started of bringing the station down. Chansey Yarrow knew how to stop it, and Elzar Mann mistook her for a Nihil trying to mess with the systems, and he actually killed her. So at the end of phase one, their possible lifeline for surviving the fall of Starlight Beacon, Elzar actually took out. And he's very well aware of that. And he has a lot of guilt about that still. And he's really deeply affected by this, and also the fact that the Jedi really have not made any progress. He feels like they should be doing more, taking more aggressive action, trying to do some sort of show of force to where the Nihil know that the Jedi aren't going to stand for what's going on. But there's a lot of disagreement amongst the different Jedi on the council about what exactly next steps should be. And this is driving Elzar a little crazy. He's also working with Chancellor Lena So. They're putting their heads together. They're trying to figure something out. They're talking about ways that the Jedi and the Republic can work together on this, but they also have different views at times too. Elzar also has a lot on his mind because of the anniversary of the fall of Starlight Beacon that is approaching. He really is concerned about there being another attack from the Nihil, like another large attack like Starlight was. But Lena So seems really convinced that that's not going to happen. And she even assures the Republic over a widespread broadcast that the Nihil are not planning an attack. But of course, she's wrong because it's the Nihil. And while the Nihil don't carry out a full attack, it does turn out that Elzar's fear was, yeah, a reasonable fear to have, because Marchion Rowe has the leveler murder Grandmaster Veter on a broadcast that is also going to the Republic. And this was a very hard scene to read. And it's really sad the way that Marchion Rowe carries this out, and the fact that the way that this is broadcast to the Republic, they all just really feel like they have no hope. Elzar especially, because he's just throughout this book, he's being really, really hard on himself. And everybody just kind of doesn't know what to do because they've just seen a very powerful Jedi just get very easily murdered on live TV. But the one thing that the broadcast does at least accomplish is that it allows the Jedi to at least see what the leveler looks like. So it's at least a starting place in their studies of maybe some things that they can do to combat this creature, maybe learning if it has some sort of a weakness, how they could possibly defeat it. So it sounds like maybe this broadcast might end up still bringing something to them because this is the first time the Jedi have ever seen the leveler is on this broadcast. So even though it was a really hard scene to read, probably really hard for the characters to watch and really awful, there's at least a glimmer of hope that could possibly come from this broadcast. And after this happens, we again see Elzar really wishing and pushing the Jedi and the Republic to take more aggressive action. He feels like if they don't do something, they're pretty much just letting Markion Road do whatever he wants. They're sending a message that they're not going to try to stop him, and he feels like that's really just not acceptable for them to be doing at this point. And this, I feel like, was kind of like the first sign that I've seen in the High Republic that's really this blatant of the Jedi becoming militarized. We've seen other examples of the Jedi helping the Republic, working with the Republic on peacekeeping and things like that, but Elzar's persistence in we have to do something more aggressive, to me, that felt like the first sort of kind of like kicking off the transition of the Jedi from being just guardians of the peace to becoming warriors. At one point in this book, it's even mentioned that Padawans were being fast tracked to become knights during this time, too. And of course, we know how that tends to turn out based on how that went during the time of the prequels. During a council meeting, when Elzar and the council are going back and forth talking about what they should be doing, Elzar's pushing aggressive action, the council's pushing learning more about the leveler and the nameless. We actually see Aslan Rel come on the scene. And Yoda brings Aslan in, and Aslan offers to help the Jedi. This scene does take place in Shadows of Starlight, so if you've read that comic, this scene will be very familiar to you, but we also see that same scene happen on the page in this novel too. Aslan Rel is a dark side user from Phase 2, who he did have a close encounter with the leveler, and that experience really affected his sanity, which later on led him to becoming a dark side user. And so Aslan is very unpredictable. He's a loose cannon. The Jedi do not want to work with him because of the way that that has gone in the past, but they really need his help. So it sounds like based on this scene, we will probably see Aslan Rel in future books talking about ways that they, kind of like sharing the information that he has about the leveler and kind of like maybe giving the Jedi some tips on what to do. At this point, exactly what he's going to be advising them on is a little bit unclear, but I do feel like this was a very strong teaser that we're probably going to see him again. Also, the manga from Phase 2 called The Edge of Balance Precedent does go a lot more into Aslan Rel's background and sort of what happens to him with the leveler, what happens to him after that. And that manga does show us that Aslan Rel did write a lot down in a journal, and he hid that journal for safekeeping. So I'm wondering if that journal is going to come into play later on in Phase 3. The journal isn't mentioned in Eye of Darkness, but just knowing about it from Phase 2, I'm wondering if that's going to come into play at all. We also follow Bel Zettifar for a lot of this book as well. Bel Zettifar is based on the Republic ship called the Tractate with Buryaga and Ember. And what this ship is doing is it's patrolling around the edge of the occlusion zone, and it's pretty much addressing any Nihil raids that come out of the occlusion zone. Some of this is more successful than others, but they're really having a hard time with the Nihil commander Melis Shrike. She is a pretty ruthless Nihil warrior. She raids very effectively, unfortunately. Anytime they have to go to a planet that she's been to, they just find it in ruins. And Belle is really committed to wanting to stop her because not only is she causing a lot of damage to all these surrounding planets, but she also is the Nihil that captured Grandmaster Veeder. And every time they try to catch her and don't successfully do that, Bell is really hard on himself and pretty much just calls it another failure. And we see him do that many times in this book. Elzar and Bell are just, they are not in a good place right now. They're both feeling a lot of guilt and shame about things that happened in phase one, a lot of which were out of their control. I do really feel for both of these characters. Another character that we're following is Gira Staros. This is the Republic senator that was a traitor in phase one and ended up joining the Nihil. She's having an affair with Markion Rowe, which that's crazy to me because I like what does she see in him, right? Like it's awful. But so she's still with him in the occlusion zone, and she seems to believe that she is capable of trying to change him, change the Nihil, try to extend some sort of diplomacy to the Republic. And there's many scenes of her trying to reason with Markion as he's sitting in his Eye of Sauron tower on Hetzal. That's literally what it's described as. There's a huge eye on the top of this tower that he's in. So that was a very cool Lord of the Rings reference. I always love when that happens. But you can tell that Gira doesn't like being in the Nihil, and sometimes it's like she doesn't like Markion either. So it's like, why are you here? What benefit do you have? There's times where she seems to recognize that she's in over her head, but she also seems to believe that she has backed the winning side. That's a direct quote from her. And I'm just having a hard time understanding what exactly her motive is. Because this whole thing about her backing the winning side doesn't really seem like she's getting a lot of actual benefits from doing that. I don't know if maybe she believed that maybe there would be more of a benefit before and now she's realizing that there's not one and she's trying to make the best of it. I don't know. I'm not really entirely sure what exactly is in it for her because it seems like she's just in a miserable situation. And she seems like she's pretty tired of how the Nihil are behaving too, but she's still there. I mean, I guess now she can't leave even if she wanted to, but if the fall of Starlight Beacon wasn't enough, I don't know what would be enough to get her to actually want to leave the Nihil. But she is trying to get Markion to consider diplomacy. And Markion is really not interested in that. He enjoys the chaos. He enjoys the brutality of the Nihil. He doesn't really care if the Nihil is recognized by the Republic as being legitimate or not. But he does eventually allow her to go to the Republic to try to negotiate with Chancellor Lena So about the Nihil being recognized by the Republic, maybe having a senator for the occlusion zone or something like that. Of course, those negotiations go nowhere because Gira Staros has absolutely lost her mind. During this meeting, she's telling Lena So that the Nihil space is flourishing, it's doing really well. That like she's just telling lies that like no one is gonna believe. I don't know what she wants, and I don't know what it was that was enticing enough for her to join the Nihil because the Nihil haven't changed in terms of the way they are behaving. They've always behaved this way. So I'm hoping that this is something that maybe becomes more clear with future books because I definitely don't think that this is the last we're going to see of her. It sounds like she is going to have an ongoing role with Markion of trying to advise him, and a lot of times he's not really going to listen to her advice because he doesn't care. But I fully expect we're going to keep seeing her in the future, and maybe this will become more clear to me with time. On the other side of the occlusion zone, we also have Porter Ingle. So this is why I was saying read The Blade if you haven't yet, because that's some awesome context into Porter's backstory. When we get to phase three, he's an old man. So if you want to see Porter in his prime, read The Blade. But at this point, when he's trapped behind the occlusion zone, Porter is going from planet to planet. He's pretty much just living out in the wilderness on his own, hiding, also trying to figure out a way to get communications past the storm wall. General Weiss, also from The Blade, has been tracking him. She knows that he's in the occlusion zone because of the types of evidence that he leaves behind when he's going from place to place. And she knows Porter. They've been rivals for a super long time at this point. So she knows her opponent really well. And she's trying to track him down. So she's on his tail. And at this point, she has not yet caught up with him. Eventually, after a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, Porter is able to track down an old EX droid from the time of the old Pathfinder teams that would go out for the Republic and do exploring on the frontier back in the days of Phase 2. So, this is one of those Phase 2 references where it does just help to know this backstory about the EX droid and why it's significant and how it works. But basically, what it is it's an old timey droid that the way that it communicates, it takes a message out to a comms tower, or like a comms buoy, wherever that might be, and then sends the message from there. So it's almost kind of like the phase two version of just like snail mail. So Porter is able to find an old EX droid on an old Pathfinder shipwreck as he's going from planet to planet. He fixes up this EX droid, puts a lot of work into getting it working again, leaves a message on it, and sends it out. Unfortunately, that plan is ruined by General Vice because she shoots down the droid, and Porter's gonna have to figure something else out. We also have Real Darrow, who is the Republic reporter who is also behind the occlusion zone. She's being held captive by the Nihil, and she's being forced by them to do propaganda broadcasting across Nihil space. She also witnesses the death of Pratri Veter during this broadcasting, and so that is something that is really hard on her, as you can imagine. But fortunately, she has managed to learn how to hide messages in her broadcasts, and she's doing this with the help of a Nihil that wants to defect. He doesn't want to defect for honorable reasons. He basically is just tired of the way that the Nihil are doing things, and he just wants out to save his own skin. But at least he's helping her get the messages out. They come up with a plan together that she's going to try to get the Jedi together, and they are going to work together to steal a path drive from a Nihil ship, which should allow them to get through the storm wall. Also behind the storm wall, we also have Avar Kriss. Her life has changed a lot since the fall of Starlight Beacon. During the days of Phase 1, she was very much front and center. She was like a poster child of the Jedi Order. She was known as being very powerful. She was known as the hero of Hetzal. But now she is undercover in Nihil space, just trying to keep her head down. And because of the situation that she's in, she can only do really little things to help people. She can't do these big grand gestures like she's used to doing. And so this is something that's a challenge for her because she always feels like she's not doing enough. But really, she's doing the best that she can. She's doing everything within her power, but she's just always questioning if she could be doing more. Something else about Avar at this point is that she misses Elzar terribly. From Phase 1, we know that Avar and Elzar have a very close relationship that's pretty much a romantic relationship, but they're having to keep it secret, of course, because they're Jedi. And being separated from him is very, very hard on the both of them. And it's not just Elzar that she misses all of the Jedi. And she feels like very just kind of out of sorts without her group of people with her. And she also feels kind of disconnected from the Force too. She still uses the Force. She still tries to use it as much as she can, but she just feels like things are just out of harmony right now. In her efforts to help people, one thing that she does is she hijacks a grain ship, and two Nihil are on it. She puts them out of in the escape pod out into space. And there's an Ugnaught pilot named Bellin, and he is not a Nihil. He's just a regular civilian that's being forced by the Nihil to fly this ship for them. So her and Bellin end up joining forces, and they just have like a wonderful relationship in this book. I loved him so much. If you loved Queel from Mandalorian, you're gonna love this character. But it's so sweet because you could tell in the beginning he's annoyed by her. Like he's annoyed that she just showed up one day and just hijacked his ship, and now he's been dragged into a situation. But he very, very quickly gets to the point to where he wants to help people too. And there's times where him and Avar are getting in sticky situations and she's like, "This is too much of a risk for you. Like you can leave." And he's like, "No, I'm not leaving you. I'm not backing out. Like if I'm going to put myself in danger, that's my own business." And he's very adamant about wanting to do his part to help people that need help. So this character was just so lovable. He's grumpy, but deep down, he's just such a sweetie. Eventually, Avar and Belen, they hear Real's message. And Avar's droid Casey is able to decode the message, and they learn that Real wants them to meet her at a designated meeting point. And so they go to do that. And what Real tells them is that they're going to steal the path drive with the help of the defecting Nihil, which Avar doesn't really love the sound of, but it's really the only plan they've got, so she's willing to try it. Meanwhile, back on the other side of the storm wall, Elzar Mann has come up with a plan of a way to lead an attack on the storm wall. They think that one of the buoys is malfunctioning, so they think if they get there at the right time, they're going to be able to go through the storm wall. Well, this plan goes horribly wrong. When they jump to try to go through the storm wall, there are a few ships that end up just crashing straight into it, and all of the people that are on board end up dying in this crash. And not only does Elzar have to live with the guilt of this once again because he feels like he misled all of these people, Markion Ro also uses it to his advantage and uses this as leverage to be like, well, you attacked us, so we're actually going to expand the storm wall. And the storm wall literally just all of a sudden just gets bigger. The buoys just move further apart and more planets are brought into Nihil space this way. So basically, the Nihil are using like a technological wonder to just very easily conquer whatever they want to conquer. And if you thought that Elzar couldn't beat himself up any more than he already has, he can, and he feels horrible about this. He feels like Markion Ro is unstoppable. He doesn't know what to do. Eventually, Lena So pretty much just tells him to get a grip. She's like, "We did the best we could. We were wrong. That sucks. All we can do is try to figure out what we're going to do next." And that kind of snaps him out of it, but of course he's still Elzar. He's still gonna be guilty. And at this point in the book, there was a lot of talk and reflection from multiple characters about Markion Ro is unstoppable. He pretty much is invincible. What are we gonna do about him? And this just had me being like, okay, he's got to have a weakness. Like, he's too invincible. Like, he's too invincible to where I'm kind of like not sold on it. Like, what is his weakness? Like, we've got to find out sooner or later. And eventually, later on in the book, my question was answered. We do see a conversation between Gira and Markion Ro where she basically tells him, "You don't know the Republic as well as you think you do." And he's so dedicated to just his own elevation and just causing random chaos that he also is lacking direction. So I suspect that that is going to be what his weakness ends up being is he's just so arrogant that he doesn't think that anybody can stop him and so he's underestimating people. And I also suspect that his lack of direction will end up causing him to kind of lose steam, maybe cause his followers to lose steam. That's just a theory for going forward, but that was just something I've been thinking about. And once again, back within the occlusion zone, we catch back up with Rill and Avar. They end up getting caught by Nihil in the middle of trying to carry out their plan, and their Nihil defector gets killed. So I guess he wasn't lying because they killed him. And General Vice shows up too, and at this point, it's like, oh great, what are they going to do now? But thank God Porter Ingle just swoops in literally and saves the day at the last second. It turns out that he also heard Real's message too, so he got there just in the nick of time. And even though their whole plan was just completely destroyed, Avar finally feels hope for the first time in months because Porter Ingle is there now. And that's something that we're learning about Avar is that when she has her people around her, she feels like she's a lot stronger than when she's by herself. So when they're trying to figure out what to do next, Rill and Belen decide to stay behind within the occlusion zone because they want to continue helping people get out. They feel like that's where they're meant to be. They feel like they have the skill set and the know-how to get people out of the occlusion zone, and so that's really what they want to focus on. And that's hard for Avar to hear because she wants to see her friends get to safety, But ultimately, she can tell that they are really serious about this, and so she accepts it even though she wishes that they could come with her. And one of the last conversations that Avar and Bellin have before they part ways, Bellin tells Avar, "You cannot discount the small gestures that change people's lives." And I love that quote so much because I feel like that quote just short, sweet, to the point. That's the theme of this book. And I feel like that's going to be a really big theme of phase three is that, if you're not capable of, doing a whole big hero of Hetzal moment where you're saving thousands of people's lives, the best you can do is you have to do what you're capable of doing for the people in your life. And that's still enough. That's still you doing the best that you can, doing what you have access to help people. And I love that message. I love that theme. I'm hoping that that's a theme that we continue to see in the High Republic because I feel like that's really important. And I love what that says about being a Jedi. Being a Jedi doesn't necessarily have to be this big grand thing. It's just doing what you can when you can and always trying to do the right thing. So I love that line, and I'm just really hoping that we see more of this theme. Then we see that Porter and Avar, they are going to go hijack Melis Shrike's ship, the Cacophony, and they're going to steal the path drive from that ship. Bellin is able to drive them up to the ship. They literally jump off of Bellin's ship and onto the Cacophony. And then once they get on the Cacophony, they just take out their lightsabers and absolutely clean house. It is so satisfying. I have been waiting for a moment like this since phase one. This part of the book just had me so excited because you're seeing Jedi do what you want to see Jedi do. They are just ripping through the Nihil, and the Nihil are running scared. They're not even trying to defend the ship. They just want to get away from the Jedi because the Jedi are way more powerful than them. And eventually they do reach the bridge very easily. They really don't have a lot of resistance getting to the bridge. It's pretty much them just showing off their lightsaber skills in that whole chapter. And they get to the bridge. Strike is upset and surprised because all of her Nihil underlings just completely abandoned her, abandoned ship. They don't care. She takes that pretty hard. And at this point, Avar and Porter now part ways because Porter knows that General Vice has showed up because of the distress call that Melis Strike had put out earlier. General Vice is attacking the Cacophony, trying to sabotage Porter and Avar. She doesn't care about the Nihil, she just cares about not letting the Jedi get out. And so Porter has to go stop General Vice. And Porter knows that he's the one that has to face her. He wants to settle this between the two of them once and for all. And he really believes that Avar is the one that needs to get to the other side of the occlusion zone. And he's willing to stay behind and deal with Vice so that way Avar can get free. He feels like Avar will be the most valuable on the other side working with the rest of the order. And of course, this was hard because I wanted to see Porter get to safety as well. I love him as a character. I don't want him to be stuck in the horrible place. But that's what he feels like he needs to do. And so he gets in a drill ship, which you might remember those from phase two. But what a drill ship is it's literally used for mining, and it has a big drill on the front of it. He gets in a drill ship, which he found on the Cacophony. There were just some extra drill ships in the hold that I guess the Nihil were using during raids. And he gets in a drill ship and he just drives it into General Vice's ship, which is pretty crazy. So he just makes quite the entrance. And him and General Vice, they do face off and they have a duel, which it sounds like is very challenging for the both of them. They're like a pretty well matched pair, which is saying something because Porter is, of course, the blade of Bardota. So, the fact that she can hold her own against him at all is a big deal. At the end of their confrontation, it is left kind of open ended as to what happens. Vice does leave, but Porter, we're kind of like, is he alive or not? We aren't really sure. It's not confirmed at this point. I believe because basically when Vice leaves him, he's injured pretty badly and he's stuck in the occlusion zone still. But I believe that Porter is alive. I don't think that they would leave that character on a note like that. I'm not convinced for even a second that he didn't walk away from that fight. I think he might be presumed dead by the order for a while. That's kind of what I'm thinking. But I don't think he actually died. I think he's just going to be on the occlusion zone side for a while longer doing I don't know what. But I definitely believed he survived the fight. And thankfully, during all of this, Avar and Casey, her droid, they do make it to the other side of the storm wall. The droid is able to get the path drive back online, and they're able to do some code stuff. And long story short, with all of that, they get through to the other side and they make it through. They actually successfully escape. And crazy enough, Bel Zettifar is right on the other side of the Stormwell on the tractate because they were waiting for the cacophony to come through for a raid because they predicted that a raid would be happening at around this time. But so the cacophony does come through, but it was actually Avar piloting it. So that's quite a surprise to everybody on the tractate when a Nihil ship comes out from behind the storm wall and it's Avar on it. And I was just so thrilled. I was so happy that Avar actually pulled it off and was okay. Because after phase one, after, we saw so many of our favorite characters die, we saw like these horrible losses, horrible defeats, and now Avar actually pulled something off. I was so relieved. And the book ends with Avar successfully on the other side of the storm wall. She's with the other Jedi again. She finally feels like she's in harmony with the Force again because she has her family around her. She's also with Elzar again. That's another really big part of feeling like it's in harmony again because of how important he is to her. I expect in future books, we're going to see them trying to figure out what exactly their relationship is going to be now, because now they both seem pretty committed to not losing the other one again. Um, they're both very attached, whether they want to be or not. So that's something that they're going to have to navigate going forward. And she also promises herself, too, that she's going to go back for Rill and Belen. She doesn't want them to be stuck behind the storm wall on the other side of the occlusion zone forever. She couldn't have done it without them. So she really feels, very passionate about making sure that they are going to be okay too. And so I just loved the note that this book ended on. There were times during this book, I mean, there there are some dark moments in this book where I was like, "Oh my gosh, where is the story going?" But thank God it ended on a great note. It made me hopeful for phase 3 because I'm hoping that we get some other books ending on a hopeful note. I know it's still High Republic, so we're gonna get our hearts broken too, but it just really made me excited for this series again. So let me know what you thought of this book. Also, let me know if you have any predictions for phase 3, especially if you have any predictions that are different than mine. I'm interested to hear like what the other theories out there are. Thanks so much for watching, y'all. I hope that y'all have a great rest of your day. Bye, guys.